Harlem winters weren't kind, especially to those who called the sidewalk home. And for 70-year-old Elijah Brooks, the streets had been home for more than a decade. His coat hung off his frame like it was built for a larger man he used to be. A tangled silver beard covered the sharp lines of his jaw, and his eyes, though tired, missed nothing. Slung over one shoulder was a faded Army-issue duffel, its seams splitting, the green canvas dulled by time. Locals had stopped noticing him. Some nodded politely. Most just walked faster. He wasn't loud, didn't ask for change, didn't bother tourists. Elijah simply existed. He gathered cans for coins and accepted leftover chicken wings from the cook at Mason's Grill. Each night he'd find a different doorstep to curl up against. Never the same twice. Didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. No one knew the man had once led convoys through Baghdad. He'd served 22 years in the U.S. Army. Retired staff sergeant. 3 deployments. The kind of soldier who stayed calm while chaos exploded around him. But nothing prepared him for what came after. His wife Janine's diagnosis, the VA's error, and her slow, avoidable death. Cancer they missed until it was too late. He never blamed the doctors. Only the system. And himself. Elijah sold their apartment, wired the money to her old church in Alabama, and vanished into the noise of New York. When a volunteer once asked why, he said, "It's easier to disappear than wake up knowing you didn't save the only person who ever saved you." That week, the cold came early. Snow teased the skyline, and Elijah hadn't eaten in 3 days. His stomach twisted, but pride still made him pause before pushing open the glass door to Riverside Market. Inside, it was warm and smelled like oranges. As the cashier helped a young mother, Elijah moved quietly toward the bread aisle. He slipped a slightly expired loaf into his coat. Nothing fancy, just enough to last the night. But the mirrors above weren't there last week. "Hey!" the owner, Mr. Donnelly, shouted. "Put that down! I'm calling the police!" Elijah didn't argue, didn't run, just turned and stood still. The loaf poked from his jacket as the man dialed 911. "I just needed something to make it through the night," Elijah murmured. Minutes later, 2 NYPD officers arrived. The younger one, Officer Barnes, hesitated as he saw the man's trembling hands. Dog tags hung loose around his neck, nearly hidden beneath the layers. "You serve?" Barnes asked, his tone softening. Elijah nodded. "Long time ago." The older officer didn't flinch. "Store's pressing charges. Can't walk away from it." At the precinct, Elijah was booked like any other shoplifter. No mention of medals. No pause at his age. He was just another case in a system that had long stopped reading the fine print. A rushed meeting with a public defender led to a court date. Next morning. Petty theft. No bail. At 9:12 a.m., Elijah shuffled into courtroom 3B of Manhattan Municipal. Same coat, same loaf, still in the evidence bag. The courtroom barely looked up. Lawyers chatted over coffee. No family waited. No one sat behind him. The clerk read his case out loud like it was already decided. The People versus Elijah Brooks. The prosecutor didn't miss a beat. "Caught stealing bread, Your Honor. Multiple priors. No fixed residence. We recommend he remain in custody." And just like that, Elijah's story became background noise. Until the judge looked up. "How do you plead, Mr. Brooks?" Judge Raymond Cole finally looked up from the file, his voice flat but audible. "Guilty, Your Honor," Elijah replied, barely above a whisper. "I was hungry." The words hung in the room like a fog. A quiet snicker rose from the back row. The judge shot a sharp glance in that direction. Silence returned. He turned back to the folder in front of him, flipping through the contents, routine, until his eyes froze on a page. Elijah Darnell Brooks, Staff Sergeant, United States Army. The name was familiar. Too familiar. Something in Judge Cole's posture changed. His grip on the bench tightened, his knuckles turning pale. He looked up, then down again, then back at Elijah. And then, he stood. The courtroom held its breath. Judges don't stand during petty theft hearings. Seconds stretched. Not a word, just stillness. His jaw locked, gaze fixed somewhere in the distance as if memory had returned uninvited. "Your Honor?" the prosecutor asked, uncertain. "Is there something wrong?" The judge cleared his throat. His voice, when it came, was unsteady. "Court will recess for 15 minutes, he said. "The defendant will remain in custody." With that, he stepped down from the bench and disappeared through the side door, his robe swaying behind him. A wave of murmurs swept across the courtroom. Phones came out. Heads turned. But Elijah didn't move. He stayed seated, his gaze lowered, as though nothing had changed, because for him, nothing ever did. But upstairs, something had shifted. Inside his private chambers, Judge Cole walked to a locked drawer. He hesitated before pulling it open. From inside, he took out an old, creased photograph. Soldiers in fatigues, boots buried in Iraqi sand, grinning in front of a weather-beaten medical tent. One face stood out, broad-shouldered, standing tall, steady even in black and white grain. Elijah Brooks. The judge sat down slowly. His hands trembled as he pulled up a secure government portal, logging into the system he used during his years consulting for the Veterans Department. A service record appeared. Staff Sergeant Elijah Brooks. 3 deployments, 2 to Iraq, 1 to Afghanistan. Logistics and convoy operations. Bronze Star recipient. Commendation for valor. Injury sustained in 2003 while evacuating wounded under enemy fire. Then a mission report, previously classified, surfaced on screen. July 2003. A U.S. convoy ambushed outside Fallujah. Under mortar attack, one driver refused to abandon the supply truck. He turned it away from a group of wounded soldiers and drove it, engulfed in flames, until it exploded a safe distance away. 17 lives saved. Further down, another line hit harder. Evacuation under fire. Staff Sergeant Elijah Brooks carried PFC Cole, M. Severe leg trauma, approximately 2 miles to extraction point. Refused treatment until all personnel were clear. The judge leaned back, his face pale. His name, Michael Cole, sat right there in black and white. "My God," he whispered. "It's him." All these years, he'd searched, asked around, filed inquiries. But the man who pulled him out of hell had vanished after discharge. No forwarding address, no service contact, just a name shouted over the roar of gunfire. Brooks. And now here he was, seated downstairs in handcuffs, arrested for stealing bread. As Judge Cole tried to steady his breathing, Elijah sat in courtroom 3B, ignored by the bailiff scrolling his phone. He didn't know that the man he'd once carried through smoke and shrapnel was just a floor above, holding a photo of them both. For 15 years, Elijah Brooks had been a ghost to the country he bled for. Now, someone finally saw him. When Janine died, Elijah Brooks let go of everything. His benefits, his papers, his future. He couldn't face the system that failed the woman he'd built his life around. He walked out of that hospital and never looked back. The streets weren't forgiving. Teenagers tossed trash at him for laughs. Store owners sprayed the sidewalk before dawn. Not to clean, but to keep him moving. Officers nudged him along with cold indifference every time someone complained. Even among the homeless, Elijah was an island. Some said he muttered in his sleep. Others heard him scream. Nobody got close. Still, he survived. Bottles and cans gave him just enough to buy cold medicine during brutal winters. But he never begged, never asked for anything. That army discipline never left him, even as the world around him did. On nights when the wind howled and his body ached, he'd pull out a photo, his Janine, smiling in front of their old porch swing. He kept it sealed in plastic, wrapped tight like something sacred. "Almost there, baby," he'd whisper. "Just a little longer." Back upstairs, Judge Cole's mind was racing. His hands moved fast across his desk, dialing numbers with purpose. First call, Veterans Affairs. He needed confirmation. Now. Second, Colonel James Mason, retired. They hadn't spoken in years, but Cole's voice was sharp, urgent. "Jim, it's Mike Cole. I found him. The man from Fallujah. He's in my courtroom. Homeless, arrested for stealing bread." A long pause followed. Then Mason said, "I'm on my way. Don't let him disappear again." Cole set the phone down and pulled out a sheet of official stationery. His pen moved with force. Elijah Brooks is not just another homeless man cycling through the court system. He is a decorated veteran, a survivor, a forgotten protector. The kind of loyalty he gave this country deserves to be returned. The judge stared at the words, his jaw clenched. Judicial ethics wouldn't let him dismiss the case outright. But nothing said he had to let the system grind Elijah up. Outside, the 15-minute recess ticked down. Back in the courtroom, his clerk noticed something odd on her desk. A black and white photo, clearly aged. In it, Elijah was carrying an injured Afghan child to a medevac helicopter. Underneath, in rough script, were the words, "Some heroes never asked to be remembered." The handwriting was unmistakable. Colonel Mason. The pieces were falling into place. Elijah Brooks wasn't just another man in a coat. He had once been the man who got others out alive. When the judge returned, Elijah immediately felt something shift. The cold detachment was gone. Something deeper had taken its place. Something that looked like respect. Before Elijah could understand it, the judge cleared his throat. "This court has received new information about the defendant's history," he said. "Further proceedings will be postponed pending full review." Elijah was remanded for the night. The prosecutor, clearly thrown off, didn't protest. As officers escorted him away, Judge Cole added, "Ensure Mr. Brooks receives a proper meal and medical attention." That evening, a local news blog ran a skeptical headline: "Homeless man claims military hero status. Judge delays sentencing." The comment section turned hostile fast. "Another faker. If he's a vet, why is he stealing? Just another con." In county holding, word spread. A younger inmate, tattoos on his neck, phone hidden in his mattress, read the article and scoffed. "Stolen valor makes me sick," he muttered, stepping close. "My brother died over there, and guys like you lie for sympathy." Before Elijah could speak, the kid shoved him hard against the wall. Elijah didn't fight back. He just absorbed it. Like he had everything else. The punch. The silence. The years. That night, Elijah Brooks didn't touch the tray they brought him. He sat in the corner of his cell, fingers curled around his dog tags and the worn plastic pouch that held Janine's photo. His eyes stared into nothing, but his heart felt something strange. For the first time in years, someone had looked at him and truly seen him. The next morning, 2 guards escorted Elijah back to the courtroom. He expected more of the same. Cold looks, empty seats, forgotten lives passing by unnoticed. Instead, the gallery was packed, every bench taken, whispered conversations, reporters outside the doors, cameras flashing like they were waiting on a verdict that would change the world. Elijah didn't understand. And then, he noticed something else. The scruffy public defender was gone. A tall man in a charcoal suit extended a hand. "Richard Harlow, Veterans Legal Defense Alliance. I'll be representing you today." Elijah stared. "Someone's been watching your case closely, Mr. Brooks," Harlow said gently. "They wanted to make sure you're not standing alone anymore." Before Elijah could respond, the doors creaked open. The crowd rose. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Michael Cole," the bailiff called out. Elijah turned, but his eyes didn't land on the judge. They locked on 3 men in full dress uniform, standing in the back. Military brass, medals shining, silent, saluting. Judge Cole's robe brushed past the bench as he took his seat. He didn't look like he had the day before. There was a different weight to his posture, something reverent. "Before we proceed with today's hearing," he began, "this court will consider relevant testimony that may directly affect the matter before us." Elijah blinked, confused. Then the first officer stepped forward. Colonel James Mason. Still strong despite the years, his presence filled the room. After being sworn in, he addressed the courtroom with practiced control. "I'm Colonel Mason, Fort Hamilton. I served with Staff Sergeant Elijah Brooks in Iraq. I'm here today because this man saved 17 lives during a convoy ambush outside Fallujah. He diverted a flaming fuel truck away from wounded men, suffering second-degree burns in the process." Gasps spread across the courtroom. "And that wasn't all," Mason added. "He later carried a wounded medic, Private Michael Cole, 2 miles under fire to reach an evac point. That medic is now your honor." All eyes turned to the judge. Cole's voice caught as he nodded, emotion rising behind his eyes. The prosecutor stood, uncertain. "Your Honor, while the defendant's service is admirable, the charge remains—" "May I continue?" Mason interrupted. He opened a folder and placed it on the evidence table. "In reviewing Mr. Brooks's file, we discovered a critical administrative error during a federal data transfer in 2008. His benefits were wrongly terminated after mail was sent to an old address. He never received notice." He turned to Elijah. "For 15 years, you've been owed $13.70 a month in disability compensation. That adds up to over $246,000, plus full medical care you never got." The courtroom fell utterly silent. Elijah's grip tightened on the defense table, his knuckles pale. Mason wasn't finished. "These are affidavits from 5 members of his old unit, all vouching for his character. And this," he lifted a letter, "is from General Everett Richards. He believes his son is alive because of Elijah Brooks." Judge Cole finally turned to Elijah. "Mr. Brooks, would you approach the bench, please?" Elijah stood slowly. The judge continued, voice low and steady. "By protocol, I shouldn't preside over a case involving someone I have a personal connection with, but I didn't recognize you at first. I didn't know the man who saved my life was standing in front of me. He paused. But I know now. I didn't recognize you yesterday, Judge Cole said softly. Not until I read the file. That's when I realized it was you. The courtroom fell completely silent. You saved my life, Staff Sergeant, the judge continued. In Iraq, I've spent nearly 20 years trying to find you. I never knew your full name, just Brooks yelled through fire. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The judge took off his glasses. His voice trembled, and the hardened formality faded from his face. I owe you everything. Across the courtroom, Elijah stood stunned. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked from disuse. I was just doing my duty, sir. No, the judge said. You did far more than that. And this country, it failed you. He turned toward the prosecution. In light of these extraordinary revelations, does the state intend to move forward? The young prosecutor rose slowly, clearly moved. Your Honor, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Elijah Brooks with prejudice. So ordered, Judge Cole said firmly. Mr. Brooks, you are free to go. And this court offers its deepest apologies. Elijah stood frozen, the words hitting harder than the cold ever had. He had been invisible for so long. The sound of his own name being honored felt almost unfamiliar. Then, the back doors opened. A young woman in her 30s entered, face streaked with tears. Elijah, she gasped. Uncle Elijah, it's me. I'm Kendra, Janine's niece. He turned slowly. Her eyes searched his. We've been trying to find you for years, she whispered. Elijah's composure cracked. Shoulders sagging, he let Kendra wrap her arms around him. His first embrace in a decade that didn't come with handcuffs. Outside, the story exploded. Reporters swarmed Colonel Mason as he stepped out of the courthouse. This isn't about one man, Mason said firmly. This is about every veteran who slipped through the cracks of the system they protected. By that afternoon, Elijah Brooks was national news. Helicopters buzzed over the city. Commentators debated justice, honor, and how many heroes we've failed to recognize. Elijah emerged from the courthouse freshly shaven, in donated slacks and a clean coat. One man at each side, Judge Cole and Colonel Mason. Not as officials, but as men standing with someone the world had tried to forget. Then came a voice from the crowd. Mr. Brooks! It was Mr. Donnelly, the store owner who had once called the cops. I didn't know, he said, shaken. I looked at you and saw a threat. I'm ashamed of that. Elijah met his eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Within 48 hours, a veterans nonprofit launched a fund in Elijah's name. It crossed $200,000 by the third day. Social media filled with similar stories. Veterans who'd lost access to benefits due to clerical errors. The VA announced an official audit of terminated cases. In a private moment, Judge Cole sat with Elijah. No cameras, no court. You carried me 2 miles that day, he said quietly. Shrapnel in your leg. They told me you wouldn't let medics touch you until they stabilized me. Elijah shrugged. You were worse off than I was. You told me something, Cole added. When I was slipping in and out, you said, just keep breathing, kid. Your story isn't over. He paused. Those words stayed with me. They made me fight. Made me believe something better was possible. I became a judge to serve, like you did. Elijah looked at him, not as a man in a robe, but as the scared kid he once carried. I'm just glad something good came out of that day, Elijah said. No, Cole replied. Everything good in my life came from that day. My wife, my career, my ability to change lives. And for the first time in nearly 15 years, Elijah smiled. A real smile. One that reached his eyes. No man left behind, he said quietly. I wasn't just saying it. A representative from Veterans Affairs stood beside Elijah Brooks, placing a sealed envelope into his hand. Cameras flashed as reporters leaned in. The man spoke quietly, but clearly. This includes all back pay and compensation due to you, Mr. Brooks, along with a formal apology for the error. Elijah didn't smile. He nodded once, firmly. When asked to speak, he stepped to the podium, his voice carrying across the courthouse lawn. I don't want pity, he said. What I want is for the next veteran, the next person who falls through the cracks, not to be forgotten the way I was. That quote echoed across the nation by nightfall. What began as a quiet courtroom moment had exploded into a national conversation. Cable news ran the story hourly. Veterans organizations spoke out. Lawmakers took the floor in Washington, citing Elijah's case while calling for urgent reform. 2 photographs circulated side by side. Elijah in uniform carrying a wounded child in Afghanistan, and Elijah curled up on a Brooklyn sidewalk. The contrast struck a nerve. What did it say about a country that could honor someone in one moment and erase them in the next? Elijah Brooks had gone unseen for 15 years. Now, he couldn't be ignored. 6 months later, he moved into Heritage House, a new veterans housing center in Bed-Stuy. It wasn't grand, but it was his. A bed he didn't have to defend, a lock on the door, a kitchen where he could make coffee without watching his back. On one wall hung framed memories. Janine on their wedding day, his army unit grinning in the desert heat, and a new photo, him standing beside Judge Michael Cole at a veterans recognition ceremony. Elijah declined most interview requests. Fame didn't interest him. But he visited schools, speaking not as a hero, but as a man who'd survived both war zones and waiting lines. His blunt honesty resonated, especially with students who didn't trust polished stories. "You don't need to fall to be forgotten," he once told a room of high schoolers. "Sometimes all it takes is silence." Each afternoon, he walked to Prospect Park, where he sat on a bench near the playground, the same bench he'd once slept on through bitter storms. He watched children chase soccer balls, listened to the wind move through the trees. Some days he said nothing, just listened. Outside the Brooklyn courthouse, a bronze plaque was mounted beside the entrance. "Justice is remembering those who were once forgotten." Next to it stood a sculpture, Elijah, mid-stride, carrying a wounded soldier across his shoulders. The soldier wore a medic patch. Behind them, the American flag waved in sculpted steel. At the dedication ceremony, the mayor announced a new initiative, legal aid for unhoused veterans, named in Elijah's honor, the Brooks Initiative. A 10-year-old boy who once watched Elijah pick up bottles had written an essay. "Not everyone in ragged clothes is broken. Some are carrying things you can't see." It won a citywide contest. Elijah remained close to Judge Cole, often having Sunday dinners with his family. One evening, Cole's teenage son asked him, "Aren't you mad about everything you lost?" Elijah thought for a moment. "I'm not here for revenge," he said. "I just want the ones who come next to know someone came before." On Veterans Day, Elijah stood at Fort Hamilton in full dress uniform, medals polished, spine straight. "I once defended this country," he told the crowd. "Today, it finally defended me." He looked out over the sea of faces, soldiers, students, senators, then added, voice unwavering, "Kindness isn't late. It's just waiting for someone patient enough to deliver it." The entire crowd stood. From young recruits to aging veterans, they raised their hands in silent salute, and for the first time in decades, Elijah saluted back, eyes forward, head high,